and gentlemen, welcome to the May 2021 New York section meeting of the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. Today's topic will be a new breed of mirrorless cameras for motion picture and video production. But before we get to that, a few mentions. I need to click there. First, recognizing our friends of SMPTE-NY sponsors who have been for 2 years running on the same investment. So congratulations to all of them, and especially the studio at B&H. And if you are interested in becoming a sponsor, we always mention that you can contact Carl Cavagnolo. There's his phone number, there's his email address. Carl works at NewTek, and thank you, Carl, for attending to that for us. A reminder that not enough people on this call are members of SMPTE and SMPTE-NY. So please visit the SMPTE.org website and sign up for professional membership. This is your professional society. Please be attentive about your membership. We've recently had section elections, and we have a few new boards of managers here in the New York section. I just want to mention congratulations to Ed DeLauder, who will be taking over as chair starting July 1st. Also Barry Grossman, who continues as secretary treasurer, and 3 new managers, Stuart Bruton from Viacom CBS, Teresa Ahmed from Audio, Video, and Controls, Inc., and Berenice Herskovitz of Sirius XM. In the Connecticut section, Brian Kobolars and Wes Simpson continue to be at the helm for that organization. So thank you to all of our volunteer managers. Tonight's event is produced by David Leitner, filmmaker, writer, consultant, DP, very well known. Participant here in New York who has produced many such meetings in the past, and his partner in crime, Mark Foreman of Mark Foreman Productions Corporation, also a director of photography and an experienced camera end user. And of course, thanking our technical producer on these virtual meetings, Wes Simpson of LearnIPVideo.com. This meeting, you've seen the announcements in the past. I'm going to toss to David Leitner, who is going to introduce the cast, and enjoy the meeting. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. This is going to be an interesting evening. We have 4 representatives of 4 companies that are on the forefront of these small mirrorless cameras as they evolve into full-fledged cinema cameras. About 12 years ago, as most of you know, Nikon and Canon introduced DSLRs that, not mirrorless at that time, but which could record HD video. And there, I remember I was actually in Japan and I was actually visiting Canon at that time. And I remember the engineers were just mystified about the interest. Why were so many people interested in this? It was a request that some journalists had made. They fulfilled the request, but the next thing they knew, people were hacking their camera for this and for that. So that indicated a dozen years ago that there might be interest in fully featured, really powerful small cameras. And we've reached a point now where so many technological developments have converged at once, starting with 4K. I shot a documentary, gosh, 5-6 years ago, and some of it was in 4K, and that was so radical at the time. I won't even tell you what I went through to be able to do that. Today, of course, the phone in my pocket can do that. So given that, what should we expect from these small cameras? I'll say at the outset that we should not expect for them to replace larger cameras. Larger cameras serve a purpose that's unique to them. But these small cameras can do a lot of damage, are quite effective in the right situation. I know because I've got a project coming up in July, a drama that I'm shooting, and I thought it's appropriate. I won't explain what it is exactly, but given its nature, it's appropriate that I could use a small camera for part of it. And immediately I started to look at the field, And I just got more excited the more I looked around. And then just of late, one or two more cameras were introduced, and it's just a really hot topic right now. So this is a very timely meeting. I'm really excited to have our four guests here. I'm going to first, the way the meeting's going to proceed is that each presenter will give a 20-minute presentation. At the end, we'll have a Q&A, and we'll take all of your questions. So, jot down notes, things that weren't addressed, and we'll definitely try to get to them. We're going to go in alphabetical order in terms of the camera company. And I'm going to read briefly, bios of each of our presenters. From Blackmagic Design, we have Bob Caniglia. And Bob began working in film and television in 1985 as a camera operator and an editor. He was an editor at the Disney Channel and at 525 Post-Production. He later worked on music videos for Prince, Madonna, and Michael Jackson. In time, he transitioned to working with production and post-production manufacturers. He's worked with Panasonic, Quantel, Snell, Da Vinci Systems, and Blackmagic Design. He currently holds the position of Director of Sales Operations at Blackmagic Design. From Canon, we have Ryan Snyder. Ryan's a senior specialist for Canon's product management team, focused on cinema EOS and professional video cameras. His roles at Canon have included field support, technical training, and being a media spokesperson for Canon Video Solutions. In terms of client support, he calls himself a friendly owner's manual. And he, walking, talking owner's manual. And he prides himself on sharing his technical proficiency with others. From Panasonic, we have Matt Frazier. Matt's been with Panasonic for 13 years, working with the Lumix Group. He was involved in the launch of the Lumix DMC G1, the world's first modern mirrorless camera, and he's knowledgeable about mirrorless design in general, from still photography to video. He's an accomplished videographer in his own right. He's an expert in studio production and post-production workflows. He's produced hundreds of projects showcasing advanced techniques like anamorphic and HDR10 and drone cinematography. Presently, Matt is manager of business development for the Lumix line. And then lastly, we have from Sony, we have Sam Ferris. Sam was born in Brazil. He emigrated at age 5, but as a result, he speaks English, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian. So don't joke in those languages unless you want him to understand your joke. He studied film and TV production, computer science, and engineering at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. There in Madison, he joined a startup called Sonic Foundry, the seat of what would become the Sony Vegas Pro video editing platform. By 2009, now at Sony, he was product manager and support engineer for Sony Latin America, based in Miami, where he managed Cinealta, XD-Cam, and NX-Cam camera lines and workflow solutions. For the past 17 years, he's worked with camera design and software engineers in Japan while educating end users and promoting Sony's latest technologies. Presently, Sam's the manager of Sony's Digital Media Production Center in LA, where he works with DPs, colorists, and film schools. So you see what I mean? We have a remarkable set of presenters this evening, and I'm really looking forward to this. Starting first, we're going to go with Bob Caniglia from Blackmagic Design. So take it away, Bob.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So Blackmagic Design, that's me. I always tell everybody that the best thing to do is to follow us on Twitter, and then you can find out the latest and greatest on our not only what's new with us, but also any new software updates and things like that, because we update a lot. So we announced the Pocket 4K camera, then the Pocket 6K camera. The Pocket 6K came out sometime in 2019, and but we were able to come out with a new one that we want to talk about tonight, which is our Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro. So building on the success of the Pocket cameras, there were some things that we wanted to add for for the advanced users. Fortunately, one of the things that we do across all of the cameras is use our Blackmagic operating system. So all the menus are the same. So if you are using multiple Blackmagic cameras of different sizes, shapes, and resolutions, the menu structure is the same, which is always pleasant. On this particular camera, it has an articulating screen. So that is one of the newer features that sets it apart. So you're able to shoot in multiple positions. That was big on the requests. And then on the side here, we were able to actually add an extra audio input, which I'll show you in a second. And the sensor itself is a 6K sensor. You can shoot 4K and 6K, and the sensor itself is the same dual native ISO that is in the original Pocket 6K camera, but the Pro also has the ability to add our new Pocket Cinema Camera Pro EVF. So that is a new design, and one that comes with a couple different eye cuffs, and you're able to mount that on the top of the camera. So there's a sensor on the actual EVF. So as you go close to it, it will turn off the rear screen to try and save battery, and it fits right in there. And then you'll see the ND filter there on the top, and that's a new feature for this Pocket Pro here, the 6K Pro. So it has choices of a couple ND filters, and they're manual. You just press the button up and down, and you'll hear the motor change the ND filters. It's got a Canon EF mount, as the 6K does, and we are also able to use it as a studio camera, which is one of the features that we've added sort of during the pandemic. But we also have a new battery, the Pro grip here, and this is designed to fit on the bottom of the Pro model only, and it takes some of the larger Sony batteries, and this way you can use all three batteries, the internal as well as the two that slide in the cage there. So when you kit it out fully, you now have a three batteries, so you can get a couple hours of record time. We record on CFast as well as the SD cards, and then there's a port for your SSD drives, and those are great because you can pump those right into your computer and get going. Gratuitous shots of how to use it out in the field. Oops, I went too fast, but that's all right. And let's see. So the idea being that this is a portable camera that can be used in a variety of methods, but one question we always get is about the actual recording. Now, Blackmagic created their own codec a few years ago, Blackmagic RAW. And Blackmagic RAW was originally implemented in our 4.6K cameras, but as resolutions started to get larger, the need for Blackmagic RAW became, it was definitely needed for not only the 6K, but then ultimately our 12K camera. But in the 6K camera, the Blackmagic RAW workflow provides excellent quality, but not only that, but so the file sizes are not massive like they would be, say, uncompressed, as you can see in the chart here, but they're pre-demosaicked in the camera itself during recording, so that when you plug in your drive into even a laptop, you're able to play back these files. And the idea of the Blackmagic RAW workflow is that you would only shoot the raw files. You would use the built-in LUT while you're editing, and then whoever's color grading would be able to send you an update, and you would not have to reconform. You would just simply update the color, and all of that is possible because of the way that we have designed the codec. And then, of course, it all goes into DaVinci Resolve, which many people obviously know lots about the DaVinci Resolve. Now, DaVinci is something that's used by all of the camera manufacturers, in the sense of we do a lot of work with them to be able to handle the codecs that they have and the different file formats. But what it gives the Pocket Cinema Camera line, or the advantage there, is that we obviously know the camera, the body, the sensor, the color science, and then of course Resolve and the codec. So all of those things, that multi-step process and the synergy between all of them and the different teams that work there, all work for the same company, which helps. But that workflow is what we desired from the beginning when we started to make cameras and I guess 2012 was the first announcement of the original cinema camera. And so where we are now with this pocket camera, to be able to add some of the pro features that people were looking for, and an interesting design, and then also, you know, built-in ND filters, the HDR screen, which is really needed out in bright light, but adding our own built-in EVF. And then I see a lot of different products that are wrapped around the cameras so that you can, you know, they have different uses. People build different cages and things like that. So in the Pocket Cinema camera line, we have the 4K, our 6K, and the 6K Pro, as we're talking about now. And as I mentioned earlier, all of them can be used as studio cameras and not just cinema cameras, which is an added benefit that sort of came in line with our pandemic, as I mentioned earlier. And so you have the ability to use them with our small switchers, the A10 mini line, and actually at this point, any of the switchers, because we can do the control now through the software. So it gives the cameras a little bit more use. I actually use one right now as my camera. I have a Pocket 4K that shoots me, and I just take the output of my A10 switcher into the computer to be my webcam. But that provides us with some extra flexibility that normally isn't used. But you know, most people use their cinema cameras to be cinema cameras. But what we are also seeing, and I'm just gonna, let me see. Yeah, I'm gonna go back to, I'm gonna stop sharing and just put me up. And let's go back. So the camera itself is now being used not only on its own, but in larger productions because of the Blackmagic Raw and the color science, the ability to match back into other cameras through using color correction like DaVinci Resolve. We're able to use people are using these cameras not just with other Blackmagic cameras, the larger ones, but also other brands of cameras, right? And this is all kind of done between the color science. This is generation 5 that's in the pocket cameras now, and also DaVinci Resolve. Now, one of the things that we've even opened up our Blackmagic Raw codec to the other manufacturers. So we have some of the other camera manufacturers being able to record Blackmagic Raw into the video assists. So the HDR versions, which are the 5 and 7-inch HDR versions, we're able to record other camera outputs in RAW into Blackmagic Raw. Now on the camera itself, I mentioned earlier, we have added an extra mini XLR. So these, now we have two. So we have two separate mini XLR inputs. There are 4 actual microphones built into the camera itself. And then in the software, you can select which input is going to either one of the 2 channels. So you can use it. There are mic preamps as well. And we have, let's see, it's difficult to show a lot of things, but on the screen, hopefully I tilt down enough, you can shoot not just Blackmagic Raw, but you can also shoot ProRes. So we have both of those choices, and the appropriate file sizes will be there. So for 6K, you need to shoot Blackmagic Raw, and as I say, those files are easily used in computers, so you can edit on a laptop, which many people do. And I don't know if you can hear it or not when I change. Maybe not, but that's just changing the ND filters. And as I say, when you put your hand, so let me see if I can shoot something. And I'll show you an image here if I can. My office doesn't have anything really great to see, but the screen will go off if you cover up the eyepiece. So that feature is new to the whole line. And I saw that our friends at Tilta have been able to figure out a way to build an articulating arm to extend the Blackmagic EVF to that way you can put it on an articulating arm and get the eyepiece off of the camera itself. So they were very clever in engineering that, and that was recently announced too. So I think the whole thing about what we were trying to do in this camera and in the whole line of cameras was to make a small version of some of our larger cameras, but and also, if you recall, we had a pocket camera originally, which I used to call the skinny pants pocket camera, skinny jeans camera. This is more of a cargo pants pocket camera because it's slightly larger, but the original 4K had the Micro Four Thirds mount, and now the 6K and 6K Pro have the EF mount. We have multiple cameras that have some of these different mounts, and that is because we know how many people have invested in all the different lenses. Obviously, the camera bodies are one thing, and the lenses are another cost. So people have been using their lens of choice. There's a lot of adapters that people have made over the years to be able to move lenses around depending on the mounts they're using. And ideally, what we really are trying to get the message out is that it's an acquisition device in a complete workflow that's designed to try and save time, and that is all part of the Blackmagic RAW workflow, where you would use our record one image and not have to make proxies, because you can actually use that image to edit and continue it all the way through the pipeline. My own daughter and I, we work on some projects. She doesn't live at home anymore, but we will shoot. We'll each have a copy of the originals, and then after she edits, she'll send it to me, and I'll tweak it. And all I have to do is send her a DRP, which is DaVinci Resolve project, which is basically a text file, and we update on each other's end. And then when it's final, good to go, we just make sure that we have the same project. Same project file, and there you go. So it's a lot easier to share the files and just make sure that everybody has the correct one. And there's nothing worse on set when you send the raw files to the editor and the compressed files to the colorist. So this prevents that, because everybody gets the same file. And in storage world, there, as I said earlier, you can shoot on SD card. You can shoot on the CFast 2 cards, so there's slots for that built in, but also an SSD can be plugged into the USB-C port, and then obviously you get a lot longer record times by using an SSD. And of course, that media is really easy to just pop right over to a laptop or a computer and access it right away. So I'm looking at my time. I probably have a couple extra minutes, but I think I will relinquish my time now and save it for Q&A
Hey, Bob.
later. Yes.
Bob, let me ask you a question or two. Could you speak a little bit about the cooling system?
Yeah. So that cooling has become. We actually had to hire some heat engineers a few years ago, as we started again to higher resolutions. Period. Right. So like 4K converters, for instance. As we started to deal with that, the mini converters that we had were just giving off too much heat. So we have really worked on our liquid cooling to be able to keep the sensor cool, obviously, but also you can't have noisy fans either while you're recording. So it's a combination of having to do sound dampening, but also keeping the sensor and the electronics cool. I know that we had several guys early on in some of the development go over to the jungles in some of the Southeast Asian area just to try and mimic some of the worst conditions they could find in terms of heat. So they could do some benchmark testing there. But yeah, that has become something that, because as you get higher, so 6K obviously turns up a lot of heat. And then when you get into 12K up the road in the cameras, you also deal with a lot of heat. So the liquid cooling has become something that we need to spend a lot of time on, and that's why this larger, the wings, if you will, for ventilation on some of the on the 6Ks are larger than the 4K, because the 6K sensor generates a lot more heat than the 4K.
Yeah, you're pushing a lot of data around.
Absolutely.
Could you speak a little bit about the viewing screen at the back. It's a 5-inch diameter screen. I believe it's 1500 nits, right?
That's correct. It is an HDR screen, so it is 1500 nits, which works well out in bright sun. And now this Pro is also has the articulating screen, which makes it even easier to view at different angles and whatnot.
That's what I was referring to as the Pro. And did you make it clear that this is a Super 35 sensor?
It is a 4/3 sensor. So
no, on the Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro.
Well, the 6K cam, what is it? The 6K is, I don't know if that's, I thought it was 4/3 or not 35. I'd have to
What's
look
the
at that.
multiplication factor when the lens is, and that way you'll get the answer.
What is it? I missed that.
No, I know it's Super 35. And
okay, I was, no, let me see. Yeah. The other thing that we did on the Pro, and I think I did not point out, was that we put the mark there for, you can't really see it, but maybe for the sensor, so that you know where the
focal
sensor
plane
mount is. The focal plane is marked on the Pro model, which it is not marked on the other models, but mostly because people don't know what that is, maybe. But that was another add-on for this one.
and your
go ahead.
I was going to say your power choices. You can power this several different ways. Do you want to speak about that?
Yeah. So there isn't a battery that you put in the bottom of the camera, which is a Sony style battery, which we moved to get slightly more record time. And because in the original Pockets, the smaller battery was running down quickly because of the USB-C drives that we're now powering. So we're powering a lot of things. But when we designed this new battery grip, we, unlike the original actually would take up the slot on the bottom. It had a way to fit in there, so you couldn't use the internal battery. But now you can use the internal battery and the two batteries that you can fit in here. But it also has a tray so that if the camera is mounted, you can hot swap while it's running, and it'll power off of the one that's inside. And you can, if you're charging, if you're plugged into AC, and there's a LEMO type connector here. We also sell some cables that you can either make your own or do a DTAP and those kind of things. So it'll charge the batteries as well as the internal, the battery inside as well as the grip. But also, if you're connected to USB-C power, it'll charge the battery. So you can, yes, you definitely can power it several different ways. And we know that other companies have made other battery options for sort of standard bricks, and those cables that we came out with enable them to be able to make some add-ons to be able to do that. That's one thing that Grant is always fascinated with, is the add-ons that the companies have been putting on to all of the cameras from the original silver box to the current line. And there's lots of cool cages and different modifications that people do. One was an articulating screen, so we had to put that on this one.
Well, Bob, thank you so much. That was really interesting. We'll come back to the camera in the Q&A, but impressive. Next, we're going to hear from Ryan Snyder from Canon.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here talking about this awesome technology. I really quickly want to I really quickly want to mention that the gentleman that would usually be doing this presentation is a gentleman by the name of Larry Thorpe. who I'm sure many of you know and have heard and seen speak over the years, a legend of the industry. I'm pretty sure most of you know that Larry decided to retire from Canon USA, and it's been about a week and a half since he retired. And I just wanted to acknowledge Larry because he's had such a profound influence on my career and my knowledge, and just wanted to acknowledge him in this forum and wish him the very best with the next chapter of his life. So with that being said, when David reached out to myself and Larry about us presenting, and it was specifically for the C70 in a mirrorless technology context, I have to say I was slightly amused. And what I mean by that is, you know, the C70 is part of our Cinema EOS line, and that's where I live in the company. And the Cinema EOS has always been mirrorless to me, and so I think David hit it right on the head that all of this really came out of you know, the 5D Mark II days and how we stumbled into success there, and just snowballed into getting the cameras more technologically advanced for both stills and video over the years. And so with the C70 being really considered as a mirrorless camera, I think my main thing is we succeeded. We succeeded in our concept, and that was to marry the technologies from both the higher end Cinema EOS cameras, which has always been dedicated high bit rate, color rich video, and also taking the features from the smaller, more compact EOS R system, and obviously compact form factor, you know, the ergonomics, and the idea of handheld shooting. So I think we accomplished that if we're being considered here in this mirrorless forum. So let's take a look, a couple specs here. So this is a 4K super 35 millimeter dual gain output, also known as a DGO sensor. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But what it provides is a whopping 16 plus stops of total dynamic range. This is the same sensor that the C300 Mark III has. So a camera that punches a little bit above this one's weight, they share the same sensor. And you're able to get that kind of dynamic range in Canon Log 2, but we also include Log 3, PQ, and HLG recording gammas for HDR. It features our venerable dual pixel CMOS AF system, just known to work, and really increases the flexibility on set. Dual SD card slots with both XF AVC and MP4, both in 10-bit 422 recording internally. High frame rates of 4K 120p up to 120p, and also up to 180p when you're in the 2K Super 16 mode. One of the cool things about this guy with the dual card slots is you have proxy and simultaneous sub-recording options. And what I mean by that, you can mix and match basically any kind of combination that you want. For broadcasters, you can be recording in a progressive format, but also in an interlaced format. You can be doing different resolutions, 2K to one card, 4K to another. So there's a lot of combinations and flexibility with this one. It also features anamorphic lens support, which is really cool for such a small little compact camera. Both 1.3x and 2x D-squeeze is supported. And very important for such a small format camera as well is electronic image stabilization with combination IS. So when you have a RF lens with optical stabilization built into it, they talk back and forth to each other. The lens CPU talks to the camera, and they coordinate their efforts to create a better stabilized image. So we really wanted to make this the most compact Cinema EOS camera. And I think we absolutely accomplished it. 2.6 pounds. You can see how it compares there to the C200 and the lighter blue, and the 1DX Mark III, the flagship DSLR in the back. So this is a really compact camera with lots of stuff built in. So let's talk about this sensor. It's the DGO sensor. As I mentioned, same sensor as the C300 Mark III. And this is a 4K DCI 17:9 sensor. You can record in DCI or you have UHD modes as well. And you can do the same thing in 2K. So you can have a 17:9 or full HD 16:9. The dual gain output sensor is something that we've spent a lot of time talking about. I could spend 20 minutes on this topic probably, but I would have to refer to the white paper that the aforementioned Larry Thorpe wrote. But at its essence, what it is accomplishing is it's taking out a readout out of each photo site, storing them in a frame hold, and then passing that signal through two different gains. So the first gain is a saturation prioritizing gain, which its sole goal is to preserve the highlights and fulfill that signal's need for color saturation. It's also being passed through the noise prioritizing gain output. And this one does just the opposite. It is concerned with bringing out the shadow area. The gain that is implied here actually will sometimes clip highlights, but it doesn't matter because the previous saturation prioritizing gain has all that information in it. So these are blended together in real time and basically creating a 16+ stop HDR image. And because it's done at such a high speed, you don't have any of the temporal anomalies that you might find with other methods of HDR capture, such as tearing or decrease in sharpness. So as we've seen, so much programming and movies are being done in really literally darker content. And what you're really gaining out of this system is a full additional stop into the shadows that is absolutely clean and usable. It's quite brilliant. I always like to mention that there is no on-off feature for this. So as long as you're in the effective frames per second range, you are gaining the benefits of dual gain output. So in Super 35, you're looking at 12 to 60 frames, you'll be getting DGO. When you go above that, you're looking at 15 stops. So it defaults back down to the traditional Canon Log 2 capability. And same for Super 16. Up to 120, you're getting DGO. But once you push those high frame rates, then you're dropping back down. I just like to point that out in case anybody's considering this for mixing and matching those footage. You will have a slight difference in high frame rate. So the dual pixel CMOS AF system is quite remarkable. If you've worked with it, I could demonstrate it right now. I'm using an EOS R with the eye detection happening. I mean, it should be following me. I hope I'm not seeing myself, but it's really amazing. We've had two photodiodes on our individual photo sites on our sensors all the way back to the C300 original, and what that was used for at that time was to increase the dynamic range of those photo sites. We could clear the electrons out faster and get a full sample out of them much quicker, effectively increasing the dynamic range. They had less space to move to get cleared out. But then years later, the engineers came up with another amazing use for this, and this is where the autofocus system comes in. And so the way it works is both photodiodes are comparing focus information across all the pixels, and it's actually able to use phase detection autofocus. I would say it slowly because it's not face detection, it's using phase detection as opposed to contrast detection, even though the system does have a great face detection, but that's how it is actually working. And it uses that information to very quickly and accurately drive the lens in the appropriate direction. So there's no hunting, it's not going the other way and trying to find it. It knows exactly which direction to run to drive that lens. So this system has actually been augmented with additional technology from our 1DX Mark III camera. So the C70 actually has this EOS ITR AFX, which not only will it detect the traditional face, but also when they turn away, it's capable of head detection. And this is a deep learning technology. And I love this explanation that I got. I said, you know, what exactly is that? They said, well, it's essentially a database of heads that the camera looks at and is able to utilize that information for better subject tracking when it comes to humans. And that's extremely important these days when you're talking about face coverings, masks. We're going to be dealing with that for quite some time, I'm feeling. But also in different types of shooting, we're seeing these utilized a lot in sporting events, things like that, where helmets are present. So this system is just improving as we go, every iteration. It's extremely customizable. You have speed controls, you have tracking controls, and it just works. And it really is a freeing type of technology that can be a real game changer. For manual focus, it also provides a benefit. We have this really cool focus guide feature on our cameras. C70 has it as well. And what that is you can move that AF box anywhere in the frame and utilize those arrows to tell you which direction to pull. And they'll converge and diverge. And when you get it right in, locked in, it turns green, as you see here. So you can utilize this technology for manual focus as well. So a first for Cinema EOS, this is the first camera with the RF mount, which was originally introduced with the EOS R. And this is a real leap forward in technology. The diameter is exactly the same as the EF mount. So EF mount is known for being a very strong mount. You know, you're putting 600, 800 millimeter lenses hanging off the thing. It can hold up to that. So we kept that same diameter. On the EOS R system with a full frame sensor, that has an additional benefit, and that's because it has an IBIS system, in-body image stabilization. It actually moves the sensor. So if the sensor is moving up into the corners or to the sides, that large diameter allows all the light to remain hitting the corners and the edges. Another thing we did was shorten the back focus. So we went from 44 millimeters down to 20. And anytime you can get that rear element of the lens up closer to the sensor, you're going to have a great impact on image quality. The lens design is it's very freeing for the engineers in this regards, because for one, the rear elements can be straighter. They don't have to be as curved and getting the light up into the corners and the edges of the sensor. And it's just, it's an easier design to work with. And you've seen some amazing RF lenses come out, lenses that we've never even, seen before this mount was introduced, such as like the 24-70 f2.8, which was kind of our, am I saying that? We're 28-70 f2. And that was like our statement piece when we put out the EOS R. That's really what the design of this mount was for, is to really push the technology and create lenses that we haven't seen before. And finally, the 12-pin versus 8-pin communication, that's going to help with autofocus, obviously, and image stabilization when you have that coordinated control. So the lens has a IS CPU, it's talking to the camera's IS, and they're coordinating, resulting in better communication. So lots of really cool things about this mount. The other thing that this mount allows is adaptability. For basically any type of lens that you want to put on there. We were very limited with that 44 millimeter, and now that there's no mirror in the way, you can adapt a lot more lenses. And we have, like I said, some amazing RF lenses, but we've sold over the years about 150 million EF lenses, and we need to retain compatibility with them. So we came out with some mount adapters, and these are no optics. They're just changing the flange distance. With these adapters, you're not losing any capability of the EF lenses. You have the same brightness, the same autofocus capability. Any of the in-camera corrections for the lenses are passed through. And so you have the plain EF to EOS R, which just changes that distance. You have the control ring mount adapter, which actually allows you to program an additional function on there. So most of the RF lenses actually have that control ring built into them, and you can control, set it to control like iris or white balance or ISO. Really cool. And then you've got a drop-in filter mount adapter, which we have two options there. The first is a polarizing filter, and then we also have a variable ND filter, which is obviously extremely useful, especially when you're adapting EF lenses that weren't able to use a front mount filter, such as your fisheyes or your really wide rectilinear lenses. We also came out with a fourth adapter specifically for the EOS C70. And this is the 0.71x adapter. This actually does have optics in it, and it projects a full frame angle of view from your EF lenses onto the Super 35 sensor. The added benefit there is you're going to get another stop in brightness. So this is known as a speed booster or focal reducer, whatever you want to call it. It's really cool. Again, enables dual pixel autofocus, optical corrections, and metadata with supported lenses. Currently, there's only 3, but very, very shortly we will be adding more to that fully compatible list. And I should say that if you put a lens on right now that's not in that fully compatible list, it's still going to work. There's a little footnote that says, the AF may not be as speedy, but I haven't had any issues with any of them. So this is an example of using a 24-105 for a scene at 24 millimeters. If you look to the lower right, you'll see that crop that would normally happen if you placed a full frame lens onto a Super 35 sensor. And on the left, using this 0.71x adapter, you retain that 24 millimeter and you get that added benefit of an additional stop of light. And a very intuitive way to mount this. You can put it on just as is, or it has the 4 screw holes on the body of the C70 that you're able to attach those lock plates on. So again, if you have something really heavy or long, you can throw that on there and not worry about stressing them out. One of the most amazing things that I saw when I got a sneak preview of this camera was the ND filters, and I was so happy to see this. We thought it was probably impossible due to that very small flange depth, but the engineers were able to incorporate it. And not only did they incorporate it into such a very small area, it's a 6 millimeter wide array, but they incorporated the same level of filtration as we have in our higher end Cinema EOS. So you've got 2, 4, 6, and then an extension, you have 8 and 10 stops of ND filter available. We also shrunk down the XLR ports. So we're using mini XLRs on here, but they are full featured, the same as full size, phantom power if you need it. We have another microphone terminal, and that brings the audio to a total of 4 channels with a stereo microphone built into the front for scratch track. And the normal terminals, we have a USB Type-C terminal for adding Ethernet and Wi-Fi adapters for control and IP streaming, FTP transfer, and also the remote terminal and a full-size HDMI terminal. The LCD monitor is vari-angle, so low shots, high shots, turn it around and record yourself. 3.5 inch. It is a capacitive touchscreen, and the menu system on this camera is really, really, really beautiful. You can get in and out of everything that you need just with the quick access menu. You don't even have to go in a lot of times to the full menu, and that's my ideal. If you don't have to go into that full menu while you're shooting, that's a win. Along with a lot of extra control, joysticks, rear controls, the select dial that's kind of, reminiscent of the EOS system, quick control dial. And of course, you have manual audio controls, which is nice. It is an actively cooled camera, so there's your exhaust vent. The sensor is the sensor block and everything is completely separated from that. So this is a weather resistant camera. You've got your dual SD card slots and a dedicated timecode port on this camera, which is really cool to have. Allowed us to get Netflix certified. They require that. And if you're shooting alongside, say some EOS Rs that don't have that timecode port, it's important to point out again, we've got 4 channels of audio. So if you needed to use like a tentacle sync or a similar device, you've got plenty of audio to be able to do that. So this is pretty amazing camera, right? Why would you ever want to go up to a larger cinema EOS or the other way? Why would we pick an EOS R? The R5 is getting all this attention. Why would you want to go here or there? So let me try to break it down as best as I can. As David said, these cameras will never replace full-size cameras, and for very good reason. This kind of illustrates it the best. The C300 Mark III, C500 Mark II, they're exactly the same in appearance and form factor. If you look go right to left here, you can see from the very basic camera body, you can build this up, you can customize it for your specific production. It is a modular system. So if you wanted to change the mount out, if you wanted to go to a PL mount or a locking EF, you can do that. If you wanted to throw a 2/3 inch lens on these cameras, you can do that with a B4 mount adapter. There are multiple viewfinder options. There are multiple SDI outputs. You can get up to 4 XLR channels with the EUV2 expansion unit, as well as enhanced control and for remote control, Ethernet, and Genlock for systemized applications, along with the base specs. So if you needed to get up to a full frame cinema EOS, you go to the 500, and that's a 5.9K CMOS sensor, along with cinema raw light recording, which the C70 does not have. Utilizing CF Express cards rather than SD for that extra speed. And boy, are they fast cards. The camera has a dedicated cooling input just for those cards. It's incredible. These cameras feature all eye high frame rates, whereas the C70 does go into a long GOP mode when you get above 4K 60. And support for user LUTs, which currently the C70 it does not have. You have the ability to bake in a user LUT into the footage, which some people have asked for, but no user LUTs as of yet. So there's always going to be a reason to go to the higher end cameras, if that's the reason, if that suits your needs. To go the other route down to the R5, why would you pick that? Well, if you need any kind of stills, you've got to go that route. The cinema EOS can take a screen grab or a frame grab, but that's where they end. This is a true still camera, 45 megapixel, amazing speed, 12 frames per second in mechanical and 20 frames per second in silent mode or electronic. If you're doing any time lapse, this has an interval timer built in, so that's a perfect tool for that. The dual pixel CMOS AF2 system on here is a little bit more advanced, honestly, than the C70. It actually has close to 100% coverage, where the C70 kind of about like 80%. And it also has the eye and detection and people and animal detection. So in-body image stabilization as opposed to electronic, and overall, the big headline on the R5 is the ability to record 8K RAW internally to the camera. So if you do need 8K or RAW, this is your guy. Of course, an electronic viewfinder, and it is weather sealed, and that magnesium body. This is a camera that's weather sealed, just like any of our EOS cameras that you see along sidelines in pouring rain, at sporting events, getting sprayed with champagne and everything else. So they're certainly more weather sealed than the Cinema EOS. But bottom line is, whichever route you go, whether you go C70, whether you go mirrorless R5, whether you go full on Cinema EOS, I think we have something to offer most productions. So I really appreciate your time and thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan. And that was, I said to each of the presenters when we were first discussing doing this event that each of these cameras had a variety of superpowers. And it makes it very difficult to choose between them. They're all amazing. But what I said at the outset was that these cameras, despite their small size, are just unbelievable bundles of technology these days. And I'm without words. Amazing. Listen, let's go next to Panasonic, to Matt Fraser, and see what Panasonic has in the realm of small mirrorless cine cameras.
Well, thank you, David. Let me go ahead and start my presentation. So my camera is going to be a touch different than the first two that have been presented to everybody. This is a photo camera that is punching well above its weight in terms of its video capabilities. So this takes 24 megapixel still images, has a mechanical shutter for doing photography, has the ability to sync with external flash systems, studio strobes. It just happens to be on steroids when it comes to the video functionality that it offers. So we're going to be talking about the Lumix S1H. So looking at the S1H, when we developed this camera, we looked at the market and we asked ourselves, which markets would have interest in a souped up mirrorless camera that could do amazing video? And when we looked at the marketplace, we saw that cinematographers and production probably had the biggest interest in a product like this. In particular, independent films and documentaries, but also for applications like a secondary camera or a third camera or crash camera, where we have productions that have higher budgets. That's another huge use case for the product. And so we took a look at the list of video functions that we have been developing throughout the years in all of our mirrorless cameras. And we said, this is probably the list that the market will need, but we didn't really know for sure. So what we ended up doing is we started consulting many cinematographers and production professionals and asked the question, how can a mirrorless camera make a difference in your production? And we came down to several applications where a mirrorless camera comes in handy. On the pre-production side, for site survey work, obviously for photography, but now with the proper design, we can get the proper aspect ratios as well for site surveys, for blocking stunt coordinations. And if you don't want to bring a giant camera on a lower end production, when you're going to be doing lensing, it's very nice to be able to do lensing when you can trust the angle of view of the sensor. When it comes to the actual work of the DOP or the production team, we ask questions about what you're missing in mirrorless cameras, and they don't speak their language. It's a big thing. They don't speak cinematography. So they tend not to be as reliable. They can't rely on them to not overheat during productions. They don't get the latitude that they need for the dynamic range. Lots of complaints about time code and sync. So we took those into account in the design. And when we talked to post-production, what post was worried about was how flexible is this codec going to be? How much transcoding am I going to have to do with these files in order to work with this project? And then again, when it comes to sound sync and then grading, a lot of times the mirrorless equivalent cameras might use similar profiles to the studio or production cameras, but at the end of the day, they just don't match. And so there's a lot of additional color work that has to be done. So with that said, let's go through each of these points kind of bullet by bullet and see how Panasonic addressed them. So some of these things are parallel. When we're talking about site survey work and blocking shots, and we would talk to the DOP and they want to match a primary camera when it comes to angle of view. We ultimately decided that a full frame sensor made the most sense for this marketplace because we can window into the Super 35 region, or we can window into an Academy region. And by offering this windowing capability, we now offer different ways to work with the sensors. So we offer a full sensor capture at up to 6K video, and that's full 3.2. That is the entire sensor. That is open gate output, which gives you the ability to either crop in post to get your 16:9 output, your 17:9. But it also works extremely well with full frame anamorphic lenses that are becoming more and more popular to be able to use. We also have a full sensor with 5.9K output as well as a 4K output. So that's full width, unbinned, unskipped, exceptionally high quality image. We start with a 5K image and we downsample to 4K if you choose, or you can capture the full 5.9K output. For Super 35 applications, we do offer a crop. And the nice thing is it can support both the DCI standard, so a 4096 by 2160 resolution or a 3840 by 2160 resolution. And we offer what I call the Academy region crop, which is an anamorphic 4:3 aspect ratio for the classic workflow of working with anamorphic lenses. Well, it would be silly if we offered these 4:3 Academy region if we didn't offer you the ability to de-squeeze multiple styles of lenses. So within a mirrorless photo camera body, we can de-squeeze from 1.30, 1.33, 1.5, 1.8, and 2x anamorphic lenses. So all of the most popular anamorphics can be de-squeezed in the camera. This is terrific if you're going to do a site survey and you want to roll out a couple of the anamorphic lenses to see how it's going to work. Terrific, mount it to an S1H and it's going to work well. On the other end of the equation as the DOP, if I wanted to use a secondary or third camera for additional pickups, typically you're renting anamorphics in a set, you can go ahead and take a PL adapter and attach it to a few different camera bodies and pick up some different angles. So when we started to ask directors of photography what was important to them, it came down, when we're talking about a mirrorless camera, one of the biggest complaints they had is that the workflow is very different. And so we had to start communicating in the language of a director of photography or a videographer. We also had to make sure that we made the camera easier to use because these cameras do photography and video, which means there's a tremendous amount of features all encapsulated into one camera. And on top of that, we are Panasonic with a broadcast background, and broadcasters appreciate tremendous flexibility with lots and lots of codec options and different compression ratios. Whereas cinematographers are used to ProRes HQ, a few resolutions, and some frame rate options. And so we had to narrow the focus of the product, make it easier for these folks to be able to use, make it more like a cinema camera, and make sure that we're including the video tools that professionals expect out of their product. So one of the first things that we did is we recognized that this style of menu system on cameras like the VariCam, the C500 Mark II has a very similar menu layout. The Arri Alexa has a menu layout like this that makes it very simple for me to choose my frame rates and my shutter speed and my iris settings. All of this communicated right through a touchscreen interface. And then you can use an external LCD screen or use the viewfinder for actual framing. And what we did is we said, well, still photographers talk in the world in shutter speed, and they talk about gain as ISO. But cinematographers talk about shutter speed as shutter angle. And videographers talk about ISO as gain. And so you can change the language the camera likes to communicate in. You can set it up the way that you're used to working with your product. And if you don't want to use that back screen as an info screen, we do incorporate a top screen that can tell you the information as well. So on the video side, there's actually 2 pages of information, and there's a function key on the front of the camera that allows you to switch. So you can check frame rate, resolution, you can check the codec, then hit a second button, you can see your audio levels, you can see what the storage is for each of your memory cards, so on. When it comes to the flip out screens, there's a complaint that they oftentimes get in the way of the port because a cinematographer likes to be able to add an HDMI monitor, some other solution to do monitoring, but they also like to use the flip out screen as well. And all of a sudden you're hitting the HDMI port. In some cases you're hitting headphone jacks and other uses that are being used for ports. So we have a dual system. The cameras monitor can flip out on a single hinge. And then we have an additional hinge that allows the monitor to rotate. And this allows it to completely clear every port on the side of the camera, helping us to keep the size down. So this is more than 40 codecs that the S1H is capable of recording just in the MOV. I'm not including the AVC HD stuff for you. This is a daunting number of options. And so we made a choice to create a filtering system that allows you to select the frame rate or resolution, codec choice, even if you want to work in hybrid log gamma for HDR projects. And once you have narrowed the results down to 10, the great part is that you can then choose your favorite codecs and store them in a special record quality list. So you can pare that 42, 43 list of codecs down to your favorite 4 to 5 to help streamline the workflow. So for tools that professionals expect, you don't normally expect on a photo camera to have a true 24 hertz for DCP deliverables for the cinema. But we give you an access to a true 24 mode in the camera, not just PAL and NTSC. Timecode, we'll go into more detail on what we can do with timecode in a moment, but we absolutely do offer timecode. If you want to do calibration of monitors, you need to do tone audio, there's an option in the camera for that. When it comes to how your deliverable is going to be dealt with, for the luminance levels, you can choose between full 0 to 1023 for the full range of grayscale, or you can make it legal if you need for a live production, so 64 to 940. These are the 10-bit options. We also have 8-bit, either legal or full range as an option. No one expects to see waveform monitors in a photo camera, but we absolutely give you a waveform monitor and you can adjust the size of it along with a vector scope. We even include zebras in 2 different flavors. You can display both of them at the exact same time. And you can frankly calibrate them. So if you want to tune a zebra to exactly 42 IRE for your midtones, so you'll only see the zebras on an 18 gray card and it won't show them if you're over or under that, great, you can absolutely do that. Or you can use our luminance spot meter function and move that little box. And wherever that box is highlighted, it will tell you what your exposure will be. Even things like a true like 709 color profile that includes a knee control, so you can actually adjust the knee for live broadcast. We incorporate master pedestal and synchro scan functions too, so we can get rid of flicker and we can match other cameras' black points. When it comes to reliability, this was a big talking point in the industry. Our first thing was to make sure we incorporate a fan. This fan runs very quietly. In fact, you can set it for different settings for controlling its output. My favorite aspect of this, though, is that even at its highest volume, it is one of the quietest fans you'll ever see on a cinema camera. And in no way does it affect the dust and splash resistance. So this is just as weather sealed as our S1 without the fan. In fact, the camera's rated for dust and splash resistance. It's also rated for freeze resistance, which means it'll operate down to temperatures as low as 14 degrees Fahrenheit. And every video codec, every frame rate, every resolution, every video you ever shoot on this camera has unlimited recording and will not overheat as long as the ambient temperature is not above 104 degrees. So this is one of the most reliable recording products in the market in the mirrorless space. We also have incorporated an in-body stabilization system. So we're actually move the sensor up and down, left and right. We can also roll the sensor and we can do pitch and yaw adjustment. And we'll work in conjunction with the in-lens stabilization system as well. This effectively gives you gimbal-like stabilization. And the best part is, if you look over here, just in this little area where it says anamorphic, ordinarily with anamorphic lenses, you're going to be steady camming this thing or you're going to end up with a gimbal. Well, we actually have optimized the stabilization for anamorphic lenses as well and for the different squeeze ratios. We're no longer going to roll that sensor with an anamorphic lens and we adjust the pitch and yaw control so you don't see a jello-y look to it. This would be one of the first cameras that I would actually handhold with a larger anamorphic lens and be happy with the results. So when it comes to Image quality, this affects a lot of decisions, in the pre-production process, whether or not you'll even approve the camera for use. Dynamic range and latitude are going to be important for your director of photography for their considerations, as is the case for post. But then post also wants to be certain that they have the tools necessary to be able to work in their chosen workflow, whether that's DaVinci Resolve, whether that's Final Cut, whether that's Premiere, however they want to work. They want to make sure that this is going to plug into their existing workflows. And so the sensor we chose is a 24 megapixel sensor, which can do 6K video. And we've incorporated our dual native ISO function, which gives you two effectively native film stocks. You'll have a low ISO film stock, which in log is going to be an ISO of 640, and a high native ISO film stock, which is going to be an ISO of 4000. So you can see the noise actually get noisier and noisier when you get to 3200. When you switch to 4000, it immediately cleans right back up again. This helps to lower production costs without having to bring as much grip onto set. And frankly, for lower budget productions, for documentary work, this is a godsend for what they're doing. We have incorporated the exact same vlog and vgamut from the VariCam and EVA. And so this means that any of your LUTs, any of your picture profiles you've programmed into DaVinci Resolve, they all will match with the S1H. What's particularly useful is if you use an ACES workflow. If we're going to work in ACES, the S1H has an IDT. So we can plug this in with an IDT and expand out to the ACES color science. This makes it a very valuable camera to match with other products like an Arri Alexa or a Red. It makes it a very flexible platform to be able to partner with those cameras. And we offer the ability to load your LUTs and looks onto the camera, which is unheard of in this space. So you have the ability to load those favorite looks that you wanted to be able to show your client on set. So we've also added the ability to output RAW over HDMI. Wow. And some companies have chosen to back Atomos, and some companies have chosen to back Blackmagic, our friends here on the call today. We didn't choose, we just picked both. So whether you like to work in Resolve, or whether you like to work in Baselight, or whether you want to work in Final Cut or Premiere, we've got you covered. Just pick the right external recorder and we're going to take care of you. And unlike almost every other competitor I have in the market, most companies don't give you access to the full sensor pixel data, full 5.9K in our case. Oftentimes they're line skipping and giving you only a 4K output, but you're going to get full 5.9K, full sensor output. You also have access to a Super 35 crop, and that's going to give you up to 60 frame, and that's going to be at 17:9 DCI aspect ratio. And we give you the Academy region crop in RAW, so you can add RAW workflows in 12-bit with your anamorphic lenses. So everybody likes to talk about picture. It seems like audio gets thought of as an afterthought with a lot of these mirrorless cameras, in particular sync. That's not the case with Panasonic. So when you look at what we've done with our product, aside from the ability to be able to mute the output of the camera, we've added dual audio gain settings. This gives us a much wider variety of microphones we can work with just through the 3.5 millimeter jack on the side of the camera. We also have now 32 levels of adjustment for your gain control on the camera. And we can even accommodate things like a line input. So if you're going to be connecting this directly into a mixing board, no problem. It's going to be able to work with it just fine. We also offer an accessory called the XLR1. This is going to give you channel 1 and channel 2 audio. No need to power it with an external battery. It pulls power right from the camera. And the best part is it will support up to 96 kilohertz 24-bit audio. So this is, reference music grade audio capture in this product. It is digitized in the XLR1, and then it's passed on and then synced in the camera. We also give you a timecode port. Now, anybody who knows photography knows that this is actually a flash port. It's what we would use for flashes in the studio. Well, our engineers got clever with this port, and we've given it a dual use. In the menu, you can turn on timecode input. We give you a dongle cable that is equipped with a BNC connector, standard BNC connector at the other end. I just leave mine hanging on the front of the camera because it screws right in and it just stays there for you. And this gives you proper timecode, and it's compatible with every timecode device I've ever seen, especially since it's a standard issue BNC, what you'd expect to see on any other camera in the industry. By the way, you can also keep a timecode generator permanently connected to it if you'd like, or you can jam timecode in and it'll keep time on its own. So when we get into the post-production space, one of the biggest concerns people have with mirrorless cameras is the fact that they almost all use these long GOP codecs. And what you'll see is that we have a tremendous number of all I codecs available in the S1H. So this makes the workflow much easier, much less, fewer times you have to do transcoding with our footage. For post-cropping, we offer, as we mentioned earlier, access to an open gate 6K mode, a 5.4K, and a 5.9K option. These, however, will be HEVC, and you'll see additional HEVC codecs. Now, HEVC's got a bit of a bad reputation of late, but it's primarily because when people are working in HEVC, they're using a 422 10-bit color space. The problem with 422 10-bit is that none of your GPUs or graphics acceleration, your graphics cards, none of them have an optimization for 422 10-bit in an HEVC encode. We intentionally choose 420 10-bit because it's optimized. I can edit this 6K file, no problem, on an M1 Mac Mini. So we're talking a MacBook that's under $1,000, or the MacBook Pro or MacBook Air. You can also edit this on the Mac Mini as well, no problem, with an M1 chip. And then last but not least, none of this matters if the studios don't believe in the product, if they don't think that this camera is going to deliver on the quality that they were expecting. So we were looking at ways to give people confidence that this product would, be good for them. Very few production companies have a list of approved cameras or give any sort of public approval, but our friends at Netflix do. And we were very fortunate that the S1H was given a Post-Technology Alliance certification. So it can be used as a primary camera in production. What's more important, though, is that Netflix requires 90% of your footage come from certified cameras, which means 10% of it can come from non-certified. The challenge here is that if you're doing a reality show, or if you're doing a documentary, or if you have a lot of stuff where you're needing to use additional angles in a vehicle, so you end up having to put on hostess trays in order to be able to do multiple takes with the approved cameras. Now you're able to use a much smaller, lighter camera that's easily hidden and cut down on the number of takes you have to do. It works great as a secondary or third camera, and especially for documentary work and reality work, it's awesome to have. So with that, I want to thank all of you for attending the conference, and I turn it over to SMPTE.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was fascinating. You had me at waveform display. I'm known for years. I've bitched and moaned, those are technical terms, about the lack of a waveform display in cameras.
Oh, you like waveform monitors?
I've been bitching and moaning for years about the lack of waveform displays in cameras. That's a big, big, big deal. So I'm happy that your camera, your little camera, this little tiny camera features that. One quick question about timecode
Sure.
that I have is, what's the resolution of the timecode crystal? In other words, how frequently does it drift? How frequently do you have to resync it?
It's a drifter. I usually sync it maybe every 4 hours or so. That tends to be accurate enough for me. I would not use that time code if you're doing like a 20 camera shoot and you're trying to make sure everything is staying connected. That's typically where we would incorporate Genlock, and that's where products like our BGH1 come into play. The BGH1 has a Genlock port, so that can give you Genlock and time code as well.
Thank you
and
very much.
This is tiny, so you can see it's really small.
Thank you very much. I told you guys that each of these cameras has superpowers. I'm just bowled over by all of them. Next, we're going to hear from Sam Ferris at Sony, and he's got some
Hello, everyone.
cameras set up, I think.
Yes, I
Sam,
do.
can you hear me?
Yes. Can
It's
you
your
hear me
show.
okay?
Yep.
All right. Great. Thank you, David. And thanks to all the speakers today. I was really interested in learning more about the new products, and hopefully we can all get together maybe over some drinks after all this lockdown is over and just talk about technology, kind of nerd out on cameras. So first of all, thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so you guys can see. I will show you a little bit of the hands-on of these cameras here that we got from the Cinema line. So let me just see here. Can you guys see there my
Looks good.
screen? All right, great. So I'm here at the Digital Media Production Center here in Los Angeles. And this is a place where we try out new products, new lenses. When we're open, we usually have filmmakers come in and do their camera tests with us before they start a series or a feature. And of course, this came from a long history of Sony cameras in digital cinematography. So starting back in 1999, which some of you know, the F900, which shot Star Wars Episode 2, and then the F950, which shot Star Wars Episode 3. So you have all of this heritage and DNA in the sensor creation, the need for 24p and digital cinematography. And now you see cameras like the Venice popping up in 2017, the FX9 in 2019, and now in 2020, we have our Cinema line, which is a mixture of these 4 cameras here. And we call it Cinema line for the reason that being that we share the same mount, which is the one mount Sony mount, the E mount, which with that adapter, we can also add various adapters to any of the mounts available in the world, primarily PL mount, which I could show you here later on with an FX3 and a PL mount, Zeiss Supreme Prime. So Cinema line incorporates the Venice for digital cinema production, high end. It's our flagship. Then we have the documentary drama with FX9 as like kind of a pseudo shoulder camera. Then the mobile creation with FX6 and FX3, which is our latest and greatest compact cinema camera, which we'll be talking about today, and also about some of the differences between the A7S III and the FX3, which they both have a lot of similarities in technology and also in their sensitivity. So we're going to go through and talk about that. But one of the most important parts of all of these cameras that they have in common is the one mount and also the full frame sensor. So if you're going to be using the same lenses on all the cameras, you know that your angle of view is going to be the same. You don't have to worry about any different adapters. You already know which adapters you need if you need them. Otherwise, you can use any of the many Sony E-mount lenses that have zoom control, which I'll show you. That grip on the FX3 actually is very powerful because it gives you that cage-free setup so that you don't have to add a cage like you would to the DSLR A7S Mark III. Just recently, we launched 3 new lenses with E-mount. And the nice part about these 3 lenses is that they all maintain the same weight and size. So if you're putting it on a gimbal, really nice. It doesn't change any of the balance on the gimbal. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the sensor of both the A7S Mark III and the FX3. They share a lot of the same sensor technologies. It's not the exact same sensor or the exact same sensor processing, but they do share a lot of the same technologies, primarily the 12 megapixels Exmor-R CMOS sensor, which will give you a lot cleaner signal even in very low light situations. And that's primarily because of this back illuminated structure. In the conventional structure, we had all of the aluminum wiring layers behind the OCLs. And then from there, the light receiving surface was behind that. So a lot of the light could have gotten bounced around and it could have hit those wires. And so, oops, sorry about that. Another meeting just happening right now. And the new back illuminated structure goes straight from the little micro lenses to the photodiode substrate, which allows us to not only capture much faster, but also much more light with only the 12 megapixels that we have on this cameras, both cameras. So that'll bring us up to really high sensitivity performance. Some of you have already seen at 409,600 ISO. Of course, the standard range is 80 to 102,400 ISO, but that can be expanded, and that just gives you extra flexibility. Obviously, we're not saying go out and shoot, with no lights. We do want you to, think about the lighting, of course. But if you are in a situation like run and gun and you just have to go for it, you do have that flexibility. As well as the 15 stops of dynamic range for both cameras. These are using the Sony S-Log3, and that's going to give us that shadow and highlight for efficient post-production editing if we're going to go into the color correction. We also have the ability to bake in the S-Cinetone LUT onto the file. That way you don't have to go through the color correction process, but you do have a very nice cinematic image, gathering information and color science from the creators of the Sony Venice. So speed, essential, 2-time readout for new capture possibilities, and also the phase detection autofocus as well as contrast autofocus. So being that it's going to give us that fast readout allows us to minimize the rolling shutter effect that comes by nature from the CMOS sensors. So you can see here a conventional sensor, and then versus the A7S III and the FX3 sensor. Okay. So the new Bion XR, this is our new generation of processing engine. So this is what's processing 8 times faster all of the information that's coming off of the sensor chip. So this is what's allowing us to also do 4K at 120 frames per second and also 240 frames per second in full HD. And that's going to give us, the ability to still work with our full frame lenses, but capture really nice images in slow motion in 4K and HD. And speaking of S-Cinetone, this is the new straight out of camera cinematic expression, which you can see here, a standard picture profile off versus a S-Cinetone. You can see how all types of skin tones render beautifully, and that is developed with the same expertise as our lovingly flagship Venice camera. So here's just a little example of how well the face detection and real-time autofocus works. Let me just make sure that plays back there. Okay, and that's using 627 phase detection autofocus points. You can see that it always is going to be capturing the eye closest to the lens. And you can also, as you're moving around, change the sensitivity, whether it goes into focus when another person's face comes in or whether it just maintains focus. Another great feature is the touch tracking autofocus, which on both cameras, you can touch the area where you want to focus and it'll automatically focus on there. And you can set it up so that you can either do the rack focus really slow, or you can do it very quickly. And the settings of the camera, it's all configurable. So that's something I really want to share with you guys here, is that it's not just autofocus where it just randomly goes crazy and starts fishing and hunting for focus. It's actually very detailed and very customizable for every user. So for example, if you look here in a fast rack focus, you can set that up in camera as your transition speed versus a really nice and slow cinematic rack focus. Okay. And in addition to that, flexibility, you also have the subject shift sensitivity, which means that when another subject comes into the screen, do you follow that subject or do you maintain your focus persistent on the same subject that was moving originally? And that's all configurable as your autofocus connection. So speaking of the FX3 we have here in our studio. When you compare it to the A7S Mark III in weight, it's a little bit lighter. It doesn't have a viewfinder, so you would have to be using the LCD screen. It's a flip out screen, 3 inches. And if you have the A7S Mark III and the FX3 working together, the nice part about it is that the images match beautifully. So if you are working with multiple cameras, same goes with our FX6, FX9, and Venice when you're working with the S-Log Gamma. So here, thanks to the internal, this is one of the main differences actually of the FX3 and the A7S III, is that we do have the internal cooling fan built in. And then you can set that up, and also whether you want it to go into auto minimum or off in rec and always off. That allows us to really do the uninterrupted 4K 60p recording. And as well as the 5-axis in-body image stabilization on both cameras, it really gives us that capability. Let me see if I could play this for you here so you can see just an example of how smooth it is. I know it might not be playing back smoothly for you guys because of the web, but it does do a slight crop, but maintains the 4K resolution. And then in addition to this stabilization, you do also have the possibility to do your image stabilization in post, which I really love because it takes the metadata from the files of all of the shaky movements that you did, and then it automatically reads and analyzes all of that metadata, and then is able to actually do such a smooth image stabilization that you think you had like, you know, a steady cam operator working on it. It's very nice, very speedy because it's not analyzing frame for frame. It's actually analyzing the metadata. So, and the nice part is the Catalyst Browse software is free. So you can do that free image stabilization as well in post with either the A7S Mark III or the FX3. And I'll show you an example of what it looks like if you stabilize by image analysis, which is image stabilization based on frame and frame, or if you actually stabilize using that metadata that I was mentioning, which is the gyroscopic metadata. So I'm sure this is what you guys have all been waiting for, is the differences between the cameras. So here we'll focus on the differences between the cameras where we're working with the S-Cinetone. There was an update to the A7S Mark III to add that S-Cinetone, so that's no longer a difference. But if you look here at the top handle, the tally lamp for recording, you have that. You also have a zoom lever on the FX3, so you can control our servo zoom lenses. You do have on both cameras the 16-bit raw output via HDMI, and that is only to the Atomos right now. Hopefully in the future we'll be able to work with other manufacturers like Blackmagic, since our software does, or our files do work well with the DaVinci Resolve as well as Adobe and Avid. And then so like I mentioned before, the main differences here also for the active cooling in the FX3 versus the A7S Mark III. And if you really need 8K, we do also have an alpha camera that allows you to record 8K. And that is a part of our alpha lineup. It's called the A1. And the A1 is going to give you approximately 42 megapixels and 8.6K resolution. And you can do that up to 30p or 24p, 25p if you're in PAL. And that's at a 420 10-bit recording. However, you do have the capability to output via HDMI 16-bit RAW from all three of these cameras. Okay. And then you also have the capability of doing the 4K 120p that you can do with the FX3 and the A7S Mark III. Now, I can't talk about Cinemaline without talking about the FX6, which I have here in the studio with me today. The FX6 just adds on to all of that technology, but gives you also the electronic variable ND filter, which a lot of our users love because it gives you 7 stops of ND, as well as giving you the ability to create your own presets, whether you want quarter stop or you want 3 stops. You can set that up in the FX6, as well as my favorite, which is the auto ND, which allows me to stay at my full aperture or set my aperture to where I want it. And then if I'm going in and out of a dark room and going to the outside, I can set that auto ND to slowly kick in. I can set it up to have maybe 1 or 2 stops of overexposure or 1 or 2 stops underexposed. So it doesn't just work automatically either. It's also customizable. And in the future, we are releasing some new firmware versions that will take the 4K output RAW from 60p all the way up to 120p in both the FX6 and the FX9, as well as a firmware version 3 for the FX9, which will allow us to do a center scan mode for Super 16 and B4 2/3 inch mount lenses, as well as update for anamorphic support. So you'll be able to shoot with anamorphic on the FX9, as well as the Venice with a D-squeeze of 2 times or 1.3 times. So as many of you know, the Venice, our flagship, also Netflix approved. And you can see mainly the reasons not just for having a 6K sensor, full frame resolution, being able to output that 3:2 aspect ratio, and also working with all of the anamorphic flavors. You can also do the Rialto mode, which is the game changer. And the Rialto mode allows you to remove the sensor from the camera and take it up to 9 or 18 feet of a distance from the Venice body, still maintaining the in-body 16-bit recording. And that's really what, is the killer feature on the Venice, with no loss of features by using the Rialto. So you have the same resolutions available to you, all the same frame rates. The ND filters also follow. You have 8 stops of actual glass ND filters. They're not the variable ones that are electronic that we find in the FX6 or the FX9. And then also this is going to allow you to put, the heavy part of the camera on your back and then just work with the sensor in your hand, but still maintaining that, 16-bit workflow. And if you look at the compression rates and the efficiency of our 16-bit versus some of the 10-bit or even our own 10-bit XAVC, you see that our 16-bit is almost the same size as what a 4K ProRes 422 10-bit file would be. So even at our highest XOCN XT in 4K 17:9, you see that we're still less than 12-bit files like 4K ProRes 444 XQ. Now, what's nice about the Venice is that you can record HD ProRes simultaneously as you're recording the 16-bit file. So if you do need your dailies created automatically, you can do that with the 10-bit ProRes files or the XAVC in 4K. So you can do 4K, 6K simultaneously on that. And of course, you guys know more bits, more colors. So 16-bit, 281 trillion color tone possible. And these are some of the movies that were shot using the Venice and some of the series episodic on all of the different streaming platforms. So my last slide here is just to remind you guys to check out Top Gun Maverick and Black Widow, which are both filmed in IMAX using the Sony Venice. And also check out sonyscine.com for various resources such as LUTs that were created by Technicolor colorists. You have 22 different artistic LUTs that you can download from sonyscine.com, which is also a great resource for data calculators, the Venice online menu simulator, which is a really nice feature to get you started with learning about the menus. So and without further ado, then let me start my video and stop sharing my screen here so you can kind of see what we have going on here. All right, and so right here I have the FX3 and I got it set up here so that you could see what I meant by the cageless. So you have the quarter 20s on top here that I can just remove this XLR connector, and it's also going to give me the grip, but then I have my 2 XLRs in there. Okay. And so I'm using right now the FX6 to shoot the FX3, and I'm using the FX9s to shoot the FX6. And then also my main camera is also an FX9. So you can see here on the top part here, I'll show you guys. So you got the quarter 20s mount, so it's cage free. You can set that up. You can see on the side here how you have a full-size HDMI plug. And that full-size HDMI is going to also give you that 16-bit raw output. And you can actually power the camera using USB-C. You can also charge the battery internally from that USB-C and use that same USB-C for FTP transfers of either video or photos. So really small size, actually the smallest size full frame that you can get right now. Okay. And then you also have the flip screen, which I was mentioning to you guys here. And the flip screen, and then the touch focus. Auto tracking there. All right. And then let's just take a quick look at the FX6. So I can show you here that feature I was mentioning here for you guys, the auto ND filter. So first thing you do is put the filter on, and then you just hold that auto ND button for 3 seconds until you see the little light pop in. And that means that now I can keep my aperture set where I want it and just be walking around with the auto ND turned on so that it kicks in when it's necessary, it turns off when it's not necessary. And then also the ability to work with the one mount system does give me the ability here to pull that back here. So I'm actually TDing by myself today because very small skeleton crew here. Okay, so here I'm going to take the lens off. You can see the full frame, and I'm going to put a PL mount on here. Okay, let me just pull it off the tripod. And then I'm going to throw my good friend Snehal's Supreme Prime 65 on here. So you can see that now my FX3 has gone into a PL mount. All right. And I can do that with all of the cameras using the same adapter because they all share that same one mount system. So, right. And then another nice feature, real quick, just because Sony is great at audio, and we also do audio products as well, you can actually put in your lavalier directly into the camera. So if you don't need to use the XLR cables, this actually gets powered directly from the battery of the camera, and I can connect it to my wireless lav and have it very small wireless audio setup, just using the MI shoe here. So without any batteries on the receiving side, but just on the transmitter side, I have my batteries on my lav. So very nice, easy to use, and a great camera for getting into the cinema line. So, and that's it. That's all of my presentation, and I'm available for questions afterwards. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much. I would like to own each one of these cameras. I don't know about everybody else in watching this. I think it's worth pointing out before we start with the Q&A, one sort of categorical difference between the 4 cameras we presented today. The Blackmagic Design Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro and the Canon C70 are both Super 35. They both have built-in ND filters, but they're both physically larger. If you put them next to the FX3 from Sony or next to the S1H from Panasonic, you'd see that those 2 cameras, which are full frame, are smaller. So that's a distinction because we don't have these lined up on a table. You all can't see that, but that's an interesting distinction. And as I said, they're all amazing. When I started studying these small cameras back in December or so, very seriously, I couldn't make up my mind because each one has a superpower or 2 or 3. So we're in a kind of golden period right now. These cameras are only going to get better. They don't replace the larger cameras. You couldn't possibly imagine a large crew working with a teeny tiny camera. That's just not going to be the way production works in for large films. But for many small projects, these cameras are more than sufficient. And also for younger DPs, there's almost a generational tendency towards these smaller cameras, at least at the outset. And I'm seeing that in many places. So having made those comments, I'd like to start with questions from people who are viewing today. Mark, do you want to handle those questions?
Sure. Okay. No problem.
This is Mark Foreman, my co-producer of this event at SMPTE New York.
I'm pulling up the question and answers. Okay. Let's see. From Tim Sassoon, is BMD planning to change to Canon RF mount and full frame sensor?
Well, in typical Blackmagic fashion, we don't talk about the future, but we do appreciate suggestions and feedback, but we don't talk about things until they launch.
Okay. And from Wes Simpson, do any of these cameras have a way to synchronize multiple units that don't require routing a coax to each camera? That's for all.
I mean, you would have to use audio to synchronize for time code and things like that. But so you have to put a cable in them.
I guess the question, are they asking, is there a way to wirelessly deliver the time code or genlock into the camera? Or are they asking if there's a way to quickly jam and then keep it in there? Because there's a couple of different, I'm a little confused by the question.
Doing wirelessly, could it be a real issue simply because of the fact that it's not always directly timed? There's some latency built into it.
Although no, if you use like the TC Systems products, or if you were to use something like a Tentacle Sync, both of those devices have a very accurate clock with a quartz crystal, and then you could wirelessly connect those in if the camera has a timecode input. So I know, Ryan, you mentioned timecode on yours. We know the FX6 and FX9 with an external
Tentacle with us too.
Yeah. So all of us could somehow figure it out with a Tentacle or a TC Systems. I didn't mean to overrun everybody there. I will now mute, so you don't have to hear me for the next few minutes.
Oh, don't mute, please. Stay with us. Next, Mark.
Okay, from Daniel Scalzo, can the presenters share their slide decks with us separately from the recording? I can answer that one simply that it's going to be this has been recorded, so basically it's going to be available to everyone in the near future. So that's really easy. Okay. Okay. Let me see this. Okay, this one's from Kevin Testoro. Hi, will you be able to use IBIS and catalysts? I guess that must be aimed at Sam.
So the way that the IBIS works is separately. So it would be the in-body stabilization would be, you know, the way that you would do it if you're not going to use Catalyst. But if you are going to use Catalyst, you turn off the in-body stabilization and then you use Catalyst. So those are the two options that you can do.
Okay. All right. Okay, and this is actually my question and answer is filling up rapidly, so I have to actually go a little bit wider. From Daniel McCoy, when can we output HDMI when using the FX3 LCD?
So that is hopefully something that could come in the future, but like Bob said, we don't talk about it until it actually comes out. So, but thanks for the feedback. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and then another question about I guess this must be for the FX3. Is there a viewfinder available for Sony?
No, there is not a viewfinder available for Sony. If you do really need a viewfinder, I would then go to the A7S Mark III for that.
Yeah.
Okay. And from Dana Kinsey, do you need a riser with a Supreme Prime?
No, I'm actually using it right now with that one.
Sam, is the lens mount on the FX3 fortified compared to the A7S III?
I can't discuss it like if it's really fortified like versus. I mean, it's very similar. I would say that just because of the body build of the FX3 is a little more robust, then I feel more comfortable putting on the FX3.
Good answer.
Okay, let me see. I'm going down this list to see if there's any others. Actually, from Mark Milken, thank you, SMPTE and collaborators, for this great show. How can I access the recording? Okay, and basically it's real simple. We'll be posting it on the SMPTE website.
We'll post it on YouTube, won't we?
Yes.
So look for this on YouTube in a couple of days.
Well, it's not going to be a couple of days, maybe, but I will be sending out a link to everybody who's registered.
Who was that? Wes?
Yeah.
Wes, will this be posted to YouTube?
It'll be on the SMPTE YouTube channel. Yes.
Okay.
The SMPTE New York YouTube channel, not the general SMPTE one, but we'll also, you know, I will send a link to everybody who registered.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm holding this camera right here is the original 5D Mark II, and it's actually the very first camera ever to shoot a feature film. And behind it is the camera that Sam was talking about, which is the A1, which is an 8K camera. So we've gone from regular HD to 8K in about since 2009 to so 12 years. So it's pretty amazing.
It really is. Yeah.
Awesome.
I want to thank everyone. It's been a wonderful presentation.
Another technical question, maybe?
Okay, I'm looking and seeing what there is. Okay,
So Mark, you might need to scroll up.
okay. From Tim Sassoon, isn't the Sigma FP smaller than the FX3 slightly? I mean, that's a question that obviously Sigma's not here, so we really can't get an answer to that at this point.
Yeah, I haven't measured either.
I should explain that there are other manufacturers of mirrorless cine cameras, and I made it clear, and I explained at the outset when we were putting this together that we invited 4 manufacturers who have a history of making cine cameras, digital cinema cameras. And I used that as we couldn't, I felt we couldn't have too many presentations in this 2-hour plus time slot. So if any of you are wondering, there are other manufacturers, they make, wonderful cameras in their own right, but we limited this presentation today to those manufacturers that also have lines of digital cinema cameras, as Sam demonstrated, and as others of you mentioned.
Does anyone else have any questions? Just type your question and answer, and we'll look at it. We'll wait a couple minutes.
Hey, Mark, there was a question about if there was a LUT if using S-Log3 to S-Cinetone.
There is not a LUT that, let's say there's not an official LUT that is going from S-Log3 to S-Cinetone, but I believe that there will be soon. And right now, what we're offering is the 22 LUTs from Technicolor, which are available free on our website at sonycine.com.
Okay, this is from an anonymous attendee. For Matt Frazier, is the sensor in the Lumix 1H the same sensor as the VariCam 35 or LC?
Would you like me to address you as anonymous, or would you like to be addressed as misattendee? I don't know how to address this person, but to answer the question, no, they are not the same sensor. The VariCam products are based on a Super 35 sensor. That sensor has a very fast readout speed. It's also the first of our cameras to ever do the dual native ISO functionality. This is a full frame sensor. It's based on a very different architecture. I do also believe that their sensor starts life as 14-bit, but I don't work on that group. Whereas ours is starting as a 12-bit sensor. So that's another difference. When we're talking about video, the S1H for photo will be a 14-bit photo sensor, but a 12-bit video sensor. So that'd be another benefit to the VariCam over the S1H. And
Now,
that's
what practical difference would the 14-bit versus 12-bit sensor make?
Well, in the end, what you'll end up, what I notice with the VariCam versus the S1H, the S1H is very much an overexposure shooter. When you're doing latitude testing and you're trying to determine how many stops under you can go versus how many stops over you can go, on the over, the VariCam and the S1H are ringers for each other. I actually think the S1H might have a 0.3 stop better over than what the VariCam would, just because its sensor is bigger. But when we start to go under, they're definitely cleaner and they can lift better than we can. So I think a lot of that is chalked up to the fact that life starts in a 14-bit sensor. Barry Russo is actually, for broadcast, I saw he's in the chat, so he's probably screaming, "No, Matt, you're wrong," or he's saying yes. But what I notice is it's just a much cleaner shadow region when you lift. That sensor is amazing with the latitude for recovery that you have.
Okay, now from Andrew Park, these are all great capture devices. I would buy the camera that is producers want. Which one is that and why? And it's, I guess it's sort of a strange question to ask, but basically I'm going to ask the manufacturers, which is the single attribute that makes your camera stand out from others? Okay, I guess we'll start with Canon. Blackmagic, I'm sorry.
You know, that's not a fair question because each one
Yeah.
of these cameras has so many attributes. They're just, think of it as a bundle, a huge bundle of attributes. One of which I sort of brought up earlier was that each of these cameras, with the exception of the A7S III, has a cooling system, fan-based cooling system. And that's really significant in these small cameras because one thing you can't, if you're involved in a real production, you can't take a chance that your camera shuts down because of a heat issue. That just doesn't fly. So that and the fact that these cameras are pushing around tremendous amounts of data, and that generates heat, period. And, you know, when you start overheating, as far as my understanding goes, you run into other issues. There are noise issues that are exacerbated by heat, etc. So my hat is off to each of these cameras. The A7S III has a reputation for not shutting down because of heat, but it gets hot. Any of you that have walked around with an iPhone in your pocket that's left on by accident, and all of a sudden you feel something warm in your pocket, and fortunately it's an iPhone that's been left on, you know that these things heat up very fast. These are microelectronic devices. We're pushing a massive amounts of data through them. So I'm really, really thrilled that each of these cameras, again, coming from your experience, each of you with digital cinema cameras, you've built in cooling into each camera. It's a big plus.
I just want to say before we go that I thought Ryan did a great job, and he's filling very large shoes. But if he could just come up with an accent, I think he's got it down.
It's so, Bob, it's just not the same without the brogue.
I'm saying if you could come up with something, you know, work on the brogue and you'll be all set.
I will try. I'll take that feedback. Thanks, Bob.
Larry gave many presentations to SMPTE New York over the years, and he was often in attendance. I mean, for all I know, he's in attendance tonight. So we were very, in New York, we were very blessed to have him. And I have never heard a speaker in the industry with more erudition. If you've ever attended any of his presentations, there was just literally no BS. It was all engineering, but in the best sense. And you learned something, no matter how much you brought to that presentation, you walked away knowing more than when you walked in. So my hat is off as well to Larry Thorpe.
Yeah, well said. Larry actually did the technical question portion of my interview. And they told me that as soon as I walked into the room, they said, well, we gotta set a timer for about 30 minutes from now. Do you know who Larry Thorpe is? Because Larry's gonna call in and ask you the tech questions. So I figured I better nail this like 30 minutes right off the bat, because after that, it's all downhill. And I tell the story over and over again. He didn't throw me softballs, but I realized very, very quickly that he wasn't trying to intimidate me, and he was rooting for me. And I think that Larry's legacy will always be that you know, he was just willing to share the knowledge and be helpful and be a team player.
Yep, for sure. I have one quick story about, so I was on a panel with he and Hugo from Sony. And this is a number of years ago when I was more clean shaven, and I was pretty intimidated by then, especially because Blackmagic is the new kid on the block to begin with. And then to be with those two guys, I did feel like I needed an accent, but I can really only do Italian, and that wouldn't have done any good because Hugo already took that one.
All
right.
So Mark, any more questions?
No, there's no more questions at this point. So if anyone wants a type of question in the next 30 seconds, that's it. So again, thank you, everyone. We really felt that this covered the subject that we needed to cover. And hopefully we'll do more of this type of presentation in the not distant future.
So I just wanted to jump in here and let everybody know about the next week's meeting, same Wednesday night, 5:30 start time. It's about production metadata workflows and standards for media and entertainment. We're going to be talking about supply chain workflows. We're going to be updating on the language metadata table, which is quite an interesting topic. And we'll have a panel discussion with some interesting folks here. Will Kreth, Yoa Levinson, James Snyder, and Dave Satin. So if you want to sign up for this meeting, the link to this sign up is in the chat window, and we'd love to see you there.
So with that, unless any of the presenters want to make a final comment, anybody?
Oh, thanks everybody for attending, and we look forward to being in person someday soon.
Here, here.
Here, here.
Amen.
Definitely. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you to each of the presenters, to Ryan and to Matt and to Bob and to Sam. Thank you, Mark Foreman, for helping me organize this. Thank you, Wes. And thank you, SMPTE-NY for sponsoring this event. It will be on YouTube in the SMPTE-NY channel. I know that quite a few people who probably aren't in attendance tonight were really interested in this topic. So spread the word. And again, thank you, everyone.
David, thank you for being a great host.
Yes, David. Thank you.
It's my
Thanks,
pleasure.
David.
Thanks, Wes and Mark. Thanks all you
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.
Great being a part of this with you.
Hey,
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
See you soon.
All right. Great job, guys. Very nice.
and again, look for the recording in the future on the SMPTE website, on the SMPTE YouTube website.
YouTube channel, and we'll send out a link.
Thank you. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you, Jeff.